A nurse leaned over my hospital bed, pretending to check my IV line, and whispered four words that stopped my heart faster than any monitor could. Do not sign anything. Just a few feet away, my daughter and her husband stood by the window, the ones who had checked me in, who had smiled at the admitting nurse, who had been so gentle helping me into that wheelchair. I froze. Was this some kind of mistake? Or was the woman in those scrubs trying to save my life? I had maybe a minute to decide, a minute to choose between my own daughter and a complete stranger. I don't know what instinct took over, but I asked for water, anything to buy time, my hands trembling against the blanket. I chose to trust that stranger in the pale blue scrubs. An hour later, in a supply closet turned confession booth, I finally understood what she'd risked everything to stop. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 68 years old. I live outside Scranton, Pennsylvania. And for 35 years, I ran my own accounting firm downtown. The kind where you know every client by name and every number tells you a story before the person does. Numbers don't lie to you. People do that all on their own. I built that habit into my bones. Look at the ledger, not the smile. Trust the columns, not the excuses. It started on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago. I was in my kitchen going through old tax files I probably should have shredded years back when I heard the garage door groan open. My daughter Kimberly and her husband Trevor had moved back in with me 11 months earlier after his construction business folded. Free rent, free groceries, and precious little conversation. We'd become polite roommates in my own house, nodding over coffee, commenting on the weather, nothing real passing between us anymore. So when I heard both of them coming down the hallway together, footsteps too even, too deliberate, something in my chest tightened before my brain caught up. Kimberly appeared in the kitchen doorway first, Trevor a step behind her, hands jammed in his pockets, eyes on the floor tile, the cabinets, anywhere but my face. "Dad," Kimberly said, her voice coated in a sweetness that didn't belong to her natural register, "we need to talk about something important." I set down my coffee mug slowly. 35 years of client meetings taught me that a small pause buys you time to read a room. Trevor cleared his throat. "We've been thinking," he said, "about your health, about being proactive." "Proactive about what exactly?" I asked. Kimberly waved a hand like she was brushing away smoke. "Dad, tell him about the specialist in Philadelphia," she said to Trevor. My son-in-law finally met my eyes, and what I saw wasn't concern. It was a man reciting lines he hadn't fully memorized. "There's a cardiologist," Trevor said, top of his field. "Does this new, minimally invasive procedure for exactly your kind of arrhythmia. We already got you an appointment. Friday." I hadn't been to a cardiologist in 4 years, and my last EKG was clean as a spring morning. "I don't have an arrhythmia," I said carefully. Trevor's smile flickered like a dying bulb. "Better safe," he said. "At your age, you can't be too careful." The silence stretched, and I studied the two of them, my daughter who used to leave crayon drawings taped to my office door, and the man she'd married 9 years ago in a backyard ceremony I'd paid for. Something had shifted in this house, and I couldn't pin the exact hour it happened. Was it when Trevor's company went under? When the calls from collectors started showing up on the caller ID as unknown number? Or had it been slower than that, a chemical reaction with no single spark, just heat building until the whole mixture changed? "When is this appointment supposed to happen?" I asked. "Friday," Kimberly said, a half-second too fast. "Everything's already arranged. We just need you there." That evening, Kimberly cooked dinner. Kimberly never cooks. I sat at my own dining table and watched her move through my kitchen with a strange, proprietary confidence, while Trevor poured wine with hands that weren't quite steady. "So this was all planned before I heard a word of it," I said, accepting the glass. "We wanted it to be a nice surprise," Trevor said. "A good one." Kimberly set my plate down, and between one bite and the next, she said it. "Dad, your life insurance policy. It's still the big one through the firm, isn't it?" 400,000? My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "How do you know that figure?" "Trevor mentioned it once," she said lightly, cutting her chicken into precise, even strips. "Just talking." I looked at my son-in-law. He was studying his plate like it held the answer to a bar exam. And a quiet, familiar voice in the back of my mind, the one that used to catch a discrepancy buried 3 pages deep in a client's ledger, said, "That number does not belong in this conversation." So I tested it. "I've been getting these chest flutters at night," I said, watching for a reaction. Trevor's eyes actually lit up before he caught himself and said, "You really should get that checked." And Kimberly cut in smooth as varnish. "Dad's just anxious. He's fine." And for half a second their eyes met across the table. Just half a second. But I've spent decades catching partners glance at each other right before they hand me numbers that don't add up. I know what a shared secret looks like. After they went to bed, I found a printed confirmation on the kitchen counter. Cardiology consult, Friday, 10 a.m., already scheduled, my insurance information already provided. They'd been certain of my yes before they ever asked the question. I sat in my study past midnight holding a photo of Kimberly at 6 years old on my shoulders at a county fair, both of us laughing at something lost to memory, and I let myself feel the whole weight of it. Then I put the photograph away, because 35 years of bookkeeping had taught me one rule that never fails. Money always leaves a trail. People always leave evidence. By morning I had a plan. I would go to the appointment. I would watch. I would document everything the way I'd document a suspicious wire transfer. When Trevor knocked on my door at 8 with a smile too bright for the hour, I said, "I'll go Friday." And I watched relief wash over his face, followed by something colder underneath it. Not relief. Anticipation. Behind him, Kimberly gave the smallest nod. The kind you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. They thought they'd won. Let them think that. I got dressed Friday morning with more care than usual, and on impulse, I slipped my phone into my breast pocket instead of my jacket, recording quietly turned on, the way I used to tape difficult client calls for my own protection. Trevor drove, gripping the wheel too tightly for a 10-minute trip. Kimberly sat in the back seat, typing messages and deleting the threads seconds after sending, her face wearing a flat, calculating stillness I'd started to recognize as her working expression. "Excited to finally get this looked at, Dad," Trevor said, his voice cracking on the last word. "Should I be?" I said. He didn't catch it. We passed the strip mall where I bought Kimberly her first bicycle, the elementary school where I coached her softball team for 4 seasons, and with every block, the pressure behind my ribs grew. It wasn't my heart, it was arithmetic. At the medical building, Trevor parked in a spot marked 15-minute loading, for what he'd told me was a full consultation. Kimberly walked me in with her hand firm on my elbow, steering me past the front desk toward a set of doors marked outpatient procedures. This didn't look like a consultation office. It looked like something with equipment in it. And that's when a nurse in pale blue scrubs stepped into my path, pretending to check the name on my wristband, and her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Sir, don't sign anything they give you in there." Then she was gone, disappearing behind a rolling cart, calling out something professional and unrelated to a coworker down the hall. I stood frozen in the corridor, my pulse doing exactly the flutter I'd only invented 2 nights before. A few feet away, Trevor was filling out a clipboard at the check-in window. Was this a mix-up? Some kind of scheduling error? I took one step toward the waiting room chairs, and the nurse appeared again, her professional mask cracked clean through this time. Her fingers closed around my sleeve, and they were shaking. "Sir," she whispered, "please, I need you to trust me right now." I looked into her eyes, and I want to tell you exactly what I saw there, because it decided everything that came after. Not confusion, not a mistake, fear. The specific fear of someone who knows a specific, terrible thing. 35 years of reading clients across a desk, telling the difference between someone nervous about an audit and someone hiding a felony, all of it fired at once in my chest. "You're serious," I said quietly. "I have never been more serious in my life," she said. And from the check-in window, Kimberly's voice rang out, "Dad, everything okay?" An edge in it that had nothing to do with concern. I made my decision the way you snatch your hand back from a stove. No deliberation at all. I put a hand to my chest, let my knees buckle, and said, "My chest, I can't," and went down onto one knee in the hallway. The panic in my voice was real. Only the cause was manufactured. The hallway erupted into a small, controlled emergency. "Sir, can you hear me? Someone call for a wheelchair." Hands under my arms lifting me gently. And through all of it, I kept my eyes working, because here's the moment I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I looked past the nurses at Kimberly and Trevor, standing frozen by the check-in desk, and before their faces rearranged themselves into worry for the small crowd gathering, I saw it. Disappointment. Plain and unmistakable. The look of 2 people watching a plan collapse in real time. Then Trevor lurched forward, half a step too aggressive, before catching himself and calling out, "Dad, what's wrong? Do you need us?" and an aide blocked his path. "Family can wait right here, sir, we've got him." As they wheeled me down the hall away from the procedure rooms, I heard Kimberly's voice, pitched low, meant only for Trevor but carrying in that stunned hallway hush. "This ruins everything." And my son-in-law hissed back, "Not here." I want to stop the story right there for one breath, because some of you listening have lived a version of this exact moment. If you've ever caught, in the face of someone you love, one flash of the wrong emotion, relief where grief belonged, irritation where fear belonged, and then watched it vanish so fast you told yourself you'd imagined it. You didn't imagine it. That flash is the truth. Everything that comes after the flash is a performance. They parked me in a curtained recovery bay while a doctor checked my vitals, pronounced them excellent, probably anxiety, sir, and left me alone with the beeping monitor. Through a gap in the curtain, I watched Trevor and Kimberly get quietly escorted out to the waiting room by hospital staff, their faces tight and pale. My phone buzzed against my chest. "Kimberly, Dad, so scared, call us the second you're okay." Then again, then a third time. I let it ring itself out, and the curtain slid back. The nurse stepped in, off duty now, her scrubs traded for a cardigan, her face gray with adrenaline crashing. She checked the hallway twice before pulling the curtain fully shut. "What I'm about to show you could get me fired. Maybe worse," she said. "But I couldn't let you walk in there without knowing." She pulled out her phone with unsteady hands. "I recorded this in the break room before your appointment," she said. "It's your son-in-law." The video showed nothing but a ceiling tile and fluorescent light, but the audio came through with awful clarity. Trevor's voice, low, rehearsed. "It's a routine catheter ablation. That's what's on the consent form." Nobody double-checks the details, they just sign. A pause, someone talking on the other end, tinny through a speaker. "Complications during a cardiac procedure happen all the time. Nobody blinks." And then Kimberly's voice, flat and businesslike. 400,000. Once the policy pays out, we finally breathe again." And she laughed, a short, dry sound that had no warmth in it at all. I watched that recording twice, and each time I understood a little more. The paperwork, the timing, the calculation, running underneath every kind word my daughter had said to me in 11 months. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Who were they talking to?" I asked. "I don't know," she said, "but I heard enough. Your daughter said the doctor performing it owed somebody a favor and wouldn't ask questions." Owed somebody a favor. I looked at this stranger who had just handed me evidence that could end her career, and I asked her the only question that mattered. "Why would you do this for a man you've never met?" Something old and raw crossed her face. "My uncle," she said. 2 years ago. A procedure that went wrong at a clinic that shouldn't have been doing it in the first place, and everyone just called it a tragedy. I knew something was off, and I said nothing, and I've regretted it every day since. I wrote her name and number into the little notebook I've carried in my breast pocket since 1991. Old accountant's habit. Document everything. We shook hands, and by the end, hers had finally stopped shaking. "Stop them," she said. That was the whole goodbye. The drive home in a cab took 25 minutes through streets I'd known my whole life, and the driver asked if my appointment got canceled. "No," I told the window. "I caught something instead." My house looked exactly the same from the curb, the porch swing, the maple tree I'd planted the year Kimberly was born. But when I let myself in, it felt like walking into a different building entirely. Every room now had a second history layered over the first. The plan had been built at that dinner table, whispered about in that hallway, refined behind that bedroom door. I went straight to my study, pulled every file I had, insurance, banking, the deed, my will, and spread 3.5 decades of my own paperwork across the desk in chronological order, the same way I'd untangle a client's finances before a big audit. Hours passed. I found the beneficiary form first, dated 5 months back, moving my life insurance from my brother's grandson, a kid working 2 jobs to get through nursing school in Pittsburgh, over to Kimberly and Trevor jointly. My signature at the bottom was a careful forgery, close enough to fool a bank teller. Wrong in one detail, no forger would think to check. The way I always cross my sevens with a small horizontal line, a habit from an old professor. This signature didn't have it. I photographed the page and kept digging, and the floor kept dropping away beneath me. Bank statements showed transfers I never authorized. $26,000 moved out over 4 months in amounts small enough to slide past casual notice. A power of attorney form granting Trevor authority over my finances. My forged signature at the bottom of that one too. And in the last folder, The worst one, medical records from appointments I had never attended, documenting early-stage cognitive decline I have never experienced. Confusion, forgetfulness, difficulty managing finances. All of it fabricated, all of it formatted to look exactly like the real thing. They hadn't just been planning to hurt me. They'd been building a paper version of Walter Higgins, whose mind was already failing, so that when something happened to the real one, nobody would think to ask hard questions. I sat alone in my study near 1 in the morning and said it out loud, because saying it made it real data instead of just a feeling. They planned this while sleeping under my roof, eating food I paid for, sitting across from me every single night. The shock burned off slow, like alcohol evaporating from a wound, and what was left underneath was cold and steady and useful. 3 days later, I sat across from Diane Osei, an elder law attorney with 22 years of practice and a handshake that meant business, and I watched her professional composure crack, page by page. Forged beneficiary form, fraudulent power of attorney, fabricated medical records. When she reached the last folder, she looked up and asked, "Does your daughter have any medical background?" "Kimberly works billing at a hospital system," I told her. "Trevor works construction, or did." Diane exhaled slowly. She had exactly the access she needed. Then I did something I'm not going to pretend was entirely honest. I handed her Trevor's old laptop, the one he'd left charging in the guest room, the one whose password I happened to know because I'd set it up for him myself 2 years ago, and he'd never bothered to change it. Diane looked at me for a long moment, then plugged it in. Deleted messages came back to life under a recovery tool, a thread with someone who signed himself only as a medical consultant, discussion of a procedure with, quote, a manageable complication rate, a fee of $9,000 for, quote, making sure nothing gets flagged during review, a meeting location, a diner off the interstate. Diane read every line in silence and finally said, flat as a closing statement, "Walter, your son-in-law negotiated a price for your death." The words should have leveled me. They didn't, not anymore. I'd already burned through that particular grief over 3 sleepless nights and come out somewhere colder on the other side. "Keep reading," I said. "There's a will." There was a draft saved on the desktop, leaving my house, my savings, everything to Kimberly and Trevor, my signature forged at the bottom, dated for a future they were confident I would never see coming. Diane took off her reading glasses and asked me the question that shaped everything that came after. "Do you want this handled quietly, or do you want it handled completely?" I didn't hesitate, because I'd already answered that question to myself in the dark. "I want them to understand exactly what they did," I said, "and I want consequences that don't expire." She nodded slowly. "Then we build the case airtight first, and we let them keep talking." 1 week, she said. "Account freezes, protective filings, all with delayed notification. Act completely normal at home. And Walter?" She paused at the door. "They're going to feel the walls closing in eventually, and desperate people make mistakes." "Good," I said. "I'm counting on it." That night, Kimberly texted, "Dad, dinner soon. We should talk about your future plans." I typed back 5 words. "Yes, let's talk soon." She read it as surrender. I meant it as a syllabus. For the next 2 weeks, I gave the performance of my life. I let my coffee go cold staring into it. I asked which pills were mine twice in one morning while a small camera above my refrigerator recorded Kimberly's satisfied little smile as she sorted them for me. "Of course, Dad, that's what I'm here for." I'd had 11 security cameras installed by a licensed company, full audio, for my own peace of mind, I told them, and they approved enthusiastically. "Smart thinking, Dad. Better safe." They never once asked to see the specifications, never realized every whispered hallway conversation was streaming to a cloud account only I had the password to. And I added one touch of my own, a small voice recorder tucked behind the books on my study shelf, the same trick I once used to catch a bookkeeper skimming from a client's register. Old habits, new stakes. It paid off within 2 days. Late at night through my headphones, I heard Kimberly's voice, tight with fury. "The hospital thing was supposed to fix this, and now we've got nothing to show for it, and a nurse who might talk. Trevor, you said the doctor was solid." And Trevor, defensive, then Kimberly again, dropping into that flat clinical register that frightened me more than shouting ever could. Then we go to plan B, we push the incompetency angle. Look at him lately, he's already halfway there. I lay in bed 1 floor above them, staring at the ceiling, recording every word, and I thought, without anger, with something quieter and harder. You're not watching me fade. You're watching me aim. The most dangerous work happened after midnight, cloning files off Trevor's laptop while the house slept, an external drive slowly filling with evidence. One close call, 80% through the copy, when floorboards creaked in the hallway, and I slipped back into my room through the connecting bath with the drive in my pocket and my pulse hammering against decades of practiced calm. Meanwhile, in daylight, I built the legal fortress, a new will, ironclad, signed before a notary named Patricia Nowak who read every clause aloud, recorded my statement on video, took my fingerprints, and asked me plainly, "Your daughter and son-in-law inherit nothing?" My son-in-law priced my death at $9,000, I told her. He'll get exactly what he paid for. Everything goes to a nursing scholarship fund at the community college, named for a nurse who still doesn't know I've done it. Patricia added 2 extra witnesses without my asking and said quietly, "I've seen this before. Families who look at an old man and see an inconvenience instead of a father." Diane gave me a prepaid phone in a parking garage. If this turns physical, one button, the police are already briefed. I pocketed it, hoping never to need it, knowing I might. The account freeze took effect on a Tuesday morning. I sat at the kitchen table behind a newspaper I wasn't really reading, counting slowly to 60, letting the reaction develop. While upstairs, Trevor's phone started buzzing and his voice went sharp. "Kimberly, come look at this." Error messages multiplied on his banking app all morning. Access restricted. Please contact your branch in person. I filmed it from the hallway, unnoticed. His call to the bank slid from confident to pleading, and when he hung up, his face had gone the color of wet cement. "They froze everything, pending review," he told Kimberly. That evening I made pot roast, low and slow, the way I'd taught myself after retirement, and served it to my would-be killers with steady hands. "Funny thing," I said conversationally, "the bank called about some strange activity on my accounts. I told them to look into it thoroughly." Trevor choked on his water. Kimberly's fork paused midair for exactly 1 second, before she recovered, and reached for the only tool she had left. "Dad, this is exactly why we've been worried. You need real oversight." "Oversight," I repeated, tasting the word. "From whom, exactly?" Silence answered for both of them. Later, drying dishes, Trevor hovered near me. "Maybe I should come with you to sort out the bank thing," he offered. I smiled gently. "That's kind, but I can manage my own finances. I'm not incompetent. Yet." The words sat between us, like a dropped glass. I watched him searching my face, trying to calculate how much I knew, and I turned back to the sink and let him sit in the not knowing. That night the study camera caught their war counsel through crystal clear audio. Kimberly pacing. "We need power of attorney through the medical route. I know people in billing who'll write whatever's needed if the price is right. We get him declared unfit. We control everything, including whatever the bank thinks it's investigating." And Trevor, nodding along, doing the math out loud. "If you'd told me 2 months earlier that my own daughter would talk about me like an asset to be liquidated, I wouldn't have believed you." I opened my old accounting ledger that night and wrote one line in the margin. "Sometimes the only way to finish the audit is to let them keep cooking the books until the numbers finally confess." Then I slept better than I had in weeks. The fake doctor's office called 2 mornings later, a pleasant voice claiming to represent a Dr. Whitfield, my longtime family physician, inviting me in for a routine cognitive screening that afternoon. Fascinating, since I have never once had a doctor. "Whitfield." "Of course," I said warmly. "I appreciate you all looking out for me." Then I called Diane, who ran the license number in 90 seconds flat, and came back with nothing. No such physician registered anywhere in the state. So I kept the appointment anyway, recorder in my breast pocket, police pre-briefed, and found exactly what I expected. A rented office suite with a paper sign taped to the door overnight and a stranger with borrowed credentials, asking questions built to make any answer sound like decline. I performed just enough confusion to keep him talking, recorded every word, and drove straight from there to the real thing. Dr. Anita Cole, 28 years in geriatric neuropsychology, an office that smelled like coffee and old books, who ran me through hours of memory batteries and pattern tests, watching my method as much as my answers, and finally set down her pen and told me, "Mr. Higgins, your cognitive function is well above average for any age bracket. No decline, no confusion, nothing resembling what's been described to me." I drove home with her written evaluation on the passenger seat and found Trevor's truck blocking my driveway. My son-in-law stood on the porch holding a thick envelope, wearing the look of a man who's decided the only way out is to bluff louder. "Dad, this is for your own protection," he said, his hand shaking as he held the papers out. "You haven't been yourself." I read every page standing right there in my own driveway while he shifted his weight and stared at nothing. Petition for guardianship. Claims of confusion and paranoid accusations against family. Financial mismanagement. A danger to himself if left unsupervised. Attached statements from 3 neighbors and a sworn evaluation from a Dr. Renee Falk, a physician I have never once met. I looked up at the boy I'd walked down the aisle at his own wedding and asked one quiet question. Who exactly is this protecting Trevor? Me or you? He got in his truck without answering and drove off too fast for the neighborhood. That evening, I walked door to door with my old ledger under my arm, the way I used to when I still did people's taxes by hand and had to explain a mistake in person, and the witness statements dissolved one at a time. Mrs. Abernathy cried on her own porch. "He told me it was just routine paperwork to help take care of you," she said. "I only told him I'd seen you gardening late at night. That's all I said." At 11 at night, checking my new cameras in a bathrobe, I said gently, "He showed you exactly what he needed you to see." She agreed to sign a retraction. So did another neighbor. 2 more wouldn't answer their doors at all. And I learned later that Trevor had paid them $200 here, $300 there, testimony purchased at the going rate for a struggling street. At the preliminary hearing, Judge Marsh read both filings with open skepticism and ordered an independent evaluation by Dr. Cole. Diane and I did not look at each other in that courtroom. We didn't dare. Afterward, she wanted to file every charge immediately. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, all of it. End it now. I shook my head. Not yet. If we move too soon, they lawyer up and the evidence stops flowing. Let them keep writing their own confession one bad decision at a time. She warned me it was a gamble. I told her I'd spent 35 years watching people who thought they were smarter than the ledger, and not one of them ever quit while they still believed they were ahead. Dr. Cole's court-ordered report landed like a verdict before the verdict. Full capacity, no impairment, guardianship petition recommended for denial. That same afternoon in Diane's conference room, we assembled the entire case. A counterfiling running past 40 pages detailing every act, a criminal complaint listing conspiracy, forgery, wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, and attempted murder, boxes of exhibits color-coded and dated. "We file everything," Diane said. "Everything," I agreed. I watched from a bench in the clerk's office as the paperwork moved from hand to hand, and by that evening, emergency hearings had appeared on the court calendar. A process server rang my own doorbell that afternoon while I filmed quietly from across the street. Kimberly answered, took the envelope, and I watched her face run through the whole sequence: confusion, recognition, fear, before she screamed for Trevor, and their argument played out in silhouette against my own living room curtains. That night my cameras caught the panic. Trevor deleting files and wiping drives with the clumsy urgency of a man who learned computers secondhand. Kimberly feeding papers into a shredder until it jammed, and then tearing pages by hand in the kitchen sink. Diane called, watching the same footage on her end. "Every deleted file is a new charge," she said. "Obstruction. They're building their own case against themselves now." A settlement offer arrived within 2 days. Return the $26,000, vacate the house, waive all inheritance, accept a permanent restraining order, in exchange for dropping every criminal charge. I read it at the same dining table where all of this had started. "They researched a way to kill me," I told Diane. "They priced it at $9,000. This isn't a billing dispute. Schedule the trial." A second offer came 2 weeks later, $60,000. Hand-delivered by Kimberly's mortified older sister, the word regret appearing in the very first sentence. I uncapped a pen and wrote 4 words across the top in the same handwriting I'd used on 35 years of tax returns. "See you in court." That evening, the nurse called, and when I asked if she was ready to testify in open court, she answered without a breath of hesitation. "My uncle never got his day," she said. "Yours is going to count for both of us." Their lives came apart with the slow, grinding thoroughness of a foundation cracking. Trevor's gambling debts surfaced through the financial discovery, over $60,000 across 3 different sports books, and once the collectors realized there would be no inheritance coming, the calls turned into visits. His truck went back on a repossession trailer in broad daylight. Kimberly's hospital system opened its own internal investigation after Diane's filing named her directly, found her fingerprints all over patient records she had no business accessing, and ended 11 years of employment in a 15-minute meeting with a security escort walking her out past people she'd worked beside for a decade. Their small rental apartment had thin walls, and the neighbors heard everything. "This is your fault. Your gambling, your greed. You wanted it done fast. You wanted the money." And one night, the sentence that summed up their entire marriage. "Now we've got nothing left except each other." And Kimberly's laugh in response, short and bitter and empty. Two of the paid witnesses came to Diane's office to recant on their own. One retired man, living on a fixed income, looked me dead in the eye and said, "He told me it was just a formality, a signature to help with paperwork. I didn't know it was to help bury you. I told him the truth was the only thing I needed from him now, and that would be the end of it." The night before the trial began, I stood in my study, in front of the wall of evidence, photographs, printed emails, timelines connected with red string like something out of a film, and I took down the one item on that wall that was never really evidence at all, a photo of Kimberly at 8 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, holding a jar of fireflies she'd caught in the backyard, grinning up at the camera like the world had never once disappointed her. I let myself grieve, for exactly as long as that photograph deserved, for the girl who was real, for the woman who chose something else, and then I wrote 3 lines on the back and sealed it in an envelope addressed to her, to be delivered after the verdict. "I gave you everything I had to give. You chose this instead. We both have to live with what's left." Then I laid out my one good suit, polished my shoes, and slept without dreaming. The courtroom filled early. Reporters in the back rows because a botched murder-for-hire plot involving a small-town accountant had turned into local news. Kimberly and Trevor sat beside their attorney, looking like faded photocopies of themselves. The prosecutor's opening statement was clean and merciless. The defendants planned the death of Walter Higgins for insurance money, researched a method, negotiated a price, forged the documents to cover it, and the only reason he sits here today, instead of in a coroner's file, is a nurse with a conscience and a phone in her pocket. The lights dimmed, and her recording played through the courtroom speakers, and I watched 12 jurors listen to my daughter calmly price my death at $400,000 and laugh at the end of it. Trevor flinched at the laugh. Kimberly stared at a fixed spot on the far wall and didn't move for the entire 90 seconds. The nurse took the stand, and her voice shook through her first few answers before it steadied and never wavered again. "I heard someone plan a man's death like they were scheduling an oil change," she said. "I recorded it because 2 years ago I stayed quiet about something I shouldn't have, and I've regretted that silence every single day since." On cross-examination, the defense tried to attack her credibility over old student loan debt, and she leaned into the microphone and delivered the one line the whole courtroom remembered afterward. "My own money troubles are exactly why I recognized what desperation looks like, and I still didn't let it turn me into an accomplice." A forensic document examiner walked the jury through the missing horizontal stroke on my forged signature under heavy magnification. The bank's records custodian laid out $26,000 of theft, transfer by transfer. Dr. Cole testified to a mind with no measurable decline, unraveling the incompetency narrative in under 10 minutes. The recovered emails scrolled across the courtroom monitor, the manageable complication rate, the $9,000 fee, while Trevor stared at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. Then I took the stand. "When did you first begin to suspect something was wrong?" the prosecutor asked. "When the appointment appeared on my counter already scheduled," I said, before I'd agreed to anything. "In my old line of work, we called that an unexplained entry, and unexplained entries get investigated, always. And what did you do next?" "Exactly what I did for 35 years with every client's books. Document everything. Trust nothing you haven't verified yourself. I just never once imagined I'd be auditing my own family." The defense's cross-examination lasted less than 10 minutes, and somehow made me sound more credible with every question they asked. The jury deliberated for just under 3 hours. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of wire fraud, guilty of forgery, guilty of elder financial exploitation. Guilty, 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 straight down the list, each word landing on Trevor until he had his head in his hands, and one single tear escaped down Kimberly's cheek before she wiped it away with the back of one knuckle. At sentencing, the judge asked if I wanted to address the court, and I stood and faced the two of them and kept it to 5 sentences, because 35 years of client meetings taught me that people remember what's short. You lived under my roof. You ate at my table every night. You answered that trust with a price tag and a delivery date. I don't hate either of you. I grieve you. And whatever money you were chasing, you will never see $1 of it, and no sentence I could ask for would add to that particular arithmetic. Trevor received 12 years in state prison with no possibility of early parole given the conspiracy and fraud charges stacked together, plus full restitution. Kimberly received 14, the additional weight coming from her role accessing confidential medical systems to falsify records, along with permanent revocation of any professional licensing and a lifetime restraining order, barring any contact with me. The judge's closing line went into the court record and into me for good. This was not a moment of weakness. This was a business plan, and the only mercy this court can offer is that it failed. Outside on the courthouse steps, I gave the small cluster of reporters 18 words about trust and consequences, and declined to say anything more. In the parking garage, I caught one last glimpse of Kimberly being led toward a transport van, and our eyes met for a second and a half before she looked away first, and what I felt wasn't victory and it wasn't warmth. It was the particular stillness of a ledger that finally, after everything, balances. Here's what this whole ordeal taught me, and I want to hand it to you straight, because that's the entire reason I'm telling you this tonight. The mistake most of us make is assuming that loving someone and truly seeing them are the same thing. They are not. Kimberly counted on that confusion. She knew a father will explain away almost anything to protect the picture he's built of his own child, and that kind of denial is the most dependable accomplice a person could ever ask for. What saved my life wasn't luck. It was one stranger who refused to stay quiet a second time, and 35 years of a habit any one of you can start tonight. So, start it. This week, call your insurance carrier, ask them to read your current beneficiaries back to you out loud, and ask them to flag your policy so that any change requires your direct verbal confirmation. 10 minutes, that's all it takes. Most folks haven't checked in a decade, and the people counting on that gap are usually closer to you than you'd ever guess. Then sit with the harder question, the one I still turn over some nights in that same study. Of the people nearest to you, who knows more about what your death would be worth than they know about how your day actually went? Give that one some real time. And now I'll ask you something back, because I've carried this alone for 2 years and I'm ready to hear what you think. Type a 1 in the comments if you believe I did right, going home that night and building the whole case quietly instead of calling the police immediately. Type a 2 if you think that recording should have gone straight to the authorities that same afternoon before another hour passed. Type a 3 if you believe I owed my daughter one honest conversation, just the two of us, before any lawyer ever got involved. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, friend, and what time it is where you are, because these stories travel a lot further than I ever expected them to, and it means more than you know every single time I read where you're writing in from. And if a stranger has ever stepped in and protected you when the people who should have wouldn't, or if you've ever caught that one wrong flash cross a familiar face, I want to hear about it below. Somebody scrolling through tonight is sitting at their own dinner table right now, watching the numbers not quite add up, and they need to hear that they're not imagining it. They're paying attention, and that's exactly the right thing to be doing. If tonight's story meant something to you, stay a while and subscribe, friend. I've got a lifetime of these, and this little corner of the internet only exists because people like you keep coming back to it. Thank you truly for sitting with an old accountant tonight. I'll see you in the next one.